it's 6 o'clock, so I guess we can probably get going if everybody's ready for that. Yes, it is a great smell. I see that Rich is stated. So tonight we're in our 6th live session of this class, and we only have one more left. Next week we'll be covering, really focusing on restaurants and kind of wrapping up the business plans that we have. So we also have not only a brewer here tonight, but Alex Ganum is the part owner of 2 restaurants in Portland. So we can take some restaurant questions tonight too. But we're really focusing this week on inventory and forecasting, as well as any other questions that you may have for the type of business model that Alex has. And we're thrilled to have him here tonight as our guest. So, and thank you all for joining in, and I hope you all have come prepared with some questions for Alex. So we're going to start by doing a brief introduction. So as I mentioned, this is Alex Ganum, and he's the owner and head brewer at Upright Brewery. As you can see in the pictures here, it's a brewery with a tasting room, and they do some packaging in 750s and in kegs. So Alex, you want to tell us a little history of your adventure in brewing?
Yeah, absolutely.
For the people that don't know you.
So the brewery started production in the spring of 2009. We're in a kind of a peculiar space, especially for a production facility. It's in the basement of a building called the Left Bank. That was an older building that was purchased by someone who was smart enough and kind enough, I suppose, is one way of putting it, to bring the building back to life, essentially. The building was from the 20s, and it probably would have made more business sense to tear it down, but he did a really big restoration on it. It was really nice, and he was a really reasonable person, too, so I got along really well with that owner, the landlord, and we ended up being the first business to move in. At that time, they were still finishing the renovation on the building, actually. So that worked out really convenient for us in some ways. I was able to use a lot of the building contractors that were working on the Left Bank building at the same time to also do some of the work in the brewery space also. So we used the same plumber, the same electrician, a lot of the same contractors all over, really. So that was really convenient, and that worked out really well. So that kind of sped up our build-out process quite a bit, I think. But being in a basement is obviously kind of funny for a production space. We have a material lift. One of the questions we get all the time is how to get everything in and out, and we have a material lift that's basically an elevator that accommodates a pallet. It's not the fastest thing, but it can move 3,000 pounds, which is really handy. It took a couple months to get that installed. For the first couple months, we did everything by hand, and those were different times. It was pretty strong back then. But no, being in a basement does have some advantages. For a brewery, it's really nice having a constant temperature. It's really good for our barrel aging program. It's really good for storing bottle conditioned beers. It's kind of like a cellar. You know, in the summertime, our brewery will never get above 70 degrees, even if it's been 100 outside for several days in a row. One funny thing is that we have a warm room that we do our bottle conditioning in. The beers usually spend about 2 weeks, give or take a little bit, in this warm room after we package them. And I like to keep that room over 80 degrees. And there's been times when it's been literally 100 degrees outside, and I still have the heater on in this warm room to keep it above 80, which feels kind of odd. I guess I'm kind of blabbing on and on about the space. But we ended up opening the tasting room within the brewery. There's not really a distinct separation between the production area and the tasting room. That's also kind of unusual. The tasting room was a bit of an afterthought. In the space that is currently the tasting room, it's probably about 300 square feet, maybe 400 square feet with some of the barrels we've stored there. That space was actually going to be leased originally to a bike frame manufacturer, and that person backed out at the last minute. At that point, we were probably 3/4 of the way into building out the brewery. And the landlord came to me and said, you know, the bike frame builder backed out. Do you want the space? It was right next to the brewery. We were going to put up a wall there. There wasn't even a wall there at that point. And so we thought about it and said, oh, this would be perfect for a tasting room because one of the ends of it was going to have a cooler wall. So we ended up, you can kind of see in that photo there on the left, the taps in the corner on the cooler wall. That would have just been all covered up. And like I said, everything you see in that photo with all the people there, that was going to be sectioned off for the bike frame builder. So that worked out really good for us because that gave us an outlet to get people into the brewery to pick up the beers at the source. And I didn't realize that being so close to downtown, we'd get so many people coming in on the weekends from out of town. It's pretty incredible. I'd say almost half the people that roll in on the weekends, especially in the summertime, are from out of town. It's kind of been a surprise for us. And then that other photo on the right has one of our brewers, Bobby Burke, explaining the beers to somebody there. And just wanted to give Bobby a little shout out there. He's a great brewer.
So how many barrels system do you have?
The brew house is a 10-barrel brew house, and we have 3 20-barrel open fermenters and 2 20-barrel open fermenters, 1 20-barrel conical fermenter that we just brew a Pilsner in, 1 10-barrel conical fermenter that we use for pretty much just one-offs and seasonals, and 1 10-barrel open fermenter that's really handy. When we opened, we didn't have that 10-barrel open fermenter, and we were double batching all of our year-round beers. And then there were times when maybe you didn't really need 20 barrels of one beer all at once, but we'd get kind of forced into brewing 20 barrels because that was the way we were set up. So getting that 10-barrel one down the road really helped us out so we can kind of fulfill smaller orders in quicker amounts of time that way.
So what's your production level now?
I was actually just looking at that today. I was doing the report for November for the OLCC, and that kind of keeps track of what we're producing and what we're taxing. And we're actually on pace to produce just about the exact same amount as we did last year, which would be about 1,250 barrels for the year. So pretty small.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the other hat that he is wearing is, I just put Grain and Gristle, but you have 2 restaurants. You want to tell us a little bit about how they fit into the business model, or they don't fit into the business model?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Grain and Gristle I opened with a couple of guys a few years ago. Thanks, Kristen. No, it's been a really pleasant experience. When I opened the brewery, there was a big part of me that wanted to have a pub and a restaurant because I love food. But opening up a brewery on my own, I felt kind of overwhelmed, and I figured there's no way I'm going to be able to do a restaurant and a brewery the way that I'd like to do both. So I kind of wrote off the restaurant idea as something I would only do if I had the right partners, and then you think to yourself, well, you know, what in the hell are you going to find the right partners? It's kind of a tough relationship to find, I think, without a doubt. And along the way, right after the time that I opened Upright, I got pretty close with one of the guys, Ben, who at that time was co-owner at Ned Ludd. And I used to pop into Ned Ludd because I really like the food there. And Ben and I really hit it off, I think, in a lot of personal ways and business ways. But I think we complemented each other really well. And so we picked up a third partner along the way, Marcus Hoover, a guy that we've actually both known for a while. And the 3 of us definitely bring a lot of different things to the table, and it's worked out really well. And we get along great even to date. We haven't had a single, you know, major disagreement whatsoever this whole time. We get along really well, which has been nice. But the bar and the Grain and Gristle I oftentimes just call the bar. But the Grain and Gristle and the brewery are very separate business-wise. A lot of people ask me, like, what's the tie-in there? How are they connected? And apart from me being, you know, owner of both or really co-owner of, you know, one of them, there really is no deeper connection than that. I mean, Upright will definitely send the Grain and Gristle some special kegs that maybe won't really see more distribution if I'm doing one-off beers, really small batch stuff that we like to do for fun. Maybe we'll feature that at the Grain and Gristle here and there. but we don't have any specific rules about it. It's really a pretty separate thing that I think a lot of people are kind of surprised to hear.
And how many taps are there altogether, and how many are yours?
At the G&G, we have 8 taps. I'm a big believer in keeping things pretty simple. I think the places that keep opening with 20 or 30 or 40 taps, they used to be pretty neat once upon a time when that was the only place in town, but now everybody's got 20 or 30 taps, and I think you can have a list of 8 or 10 taps. It's more than enough good beer for people to choose from. That's just me, though. I think too much choice is kind of a bad thing. But at the G&G, we've got 8 taps, which I think is a really nice number, and one of them runs our Pilsner the whole time. That's the only tap that's stagnant and stays the same, and the 7 other taps rotate around. And sometimes you might see half the list might be upright beers. Sometimes it might just be the Pilsner. Like I said, there's no rules. It just kind of depends on what's sort of working out at the time.
Great. Well, let's jump into the beers. You can tell us a little bit about the beer journey here. We're going to see a few of them.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun at the brewery. We definitely opened with like a French and Belgian focus. We do 4 year-round numbered beers that we produce on draft and in bottles, just in those 750s. All those bottles are done very much by hand. People ask us why we don't do 6-packs and 12-ounce bottles. It's because it would be that much more work. I always invite those people over on a bottling day. But yeah, so the French and Belgian focus has been a lot of fun. It's something that personally, from my homebrewing days, I found really fascinating and really just really satisfying to produce. But then along the way, I mean, when you brew all the time and you brew every day, you really want to mix it up. And I think you can ask a brewer, are there any styles of beer that they don't like? Nobody's going to say anything. I mean, I think brewers love everything revolving around beer. And so one of my other brewers, Garrett and myself, both have a deep love for German-style beers, which is kind of funny because German-style beers are almost the opposite of the Belgian beers. And so along the way, we've produced, apart from that year-round Pilsner that we're making, which is very much in a German style, we've brewed almost every German style of beer out there, except for some of the really obscure ones, and that's been a lot of fun. So we try not to keep ourselves too pigeonholed. I think early on people referred to us as the Belgian brewery, and we didn't really like that. We're not big marketing guys. I mean, everybody down at the brewery is kind of a production guy, myself included, and we didn't want to put labels on what we were doing. I think we're really trying to keep it simple and put the beers out as just beers, and hopefully remind people that it's really just beer.
So what is unique about the 4 relative to the other ones we're going to look at?
The 4 is our biggest seller in summertime by far. It's a wheat-based beer that has a nice amount of tartness to it. It's really dry. The 4 is a great food beer, I think. It tends to link up with things really well. And then the rest of the beers that we make get a little bit more forward in their flavor profiles. The next one that we do, called the 5, is very hop forward. Maybe not so much by Portland standards, but it's hop forward for definitely France and Belgium. We use all Oregon Road hops too, which I really like. I think we can pull, even in the German-style Pilsner, we use all of our hops are coming from one farm in Mount Angel. And I think it's pretty amazing what's coming out of this region right now for hops. They're very high quality, and I think you'd be kind of crazy to look for hops in Europe right now, unless there's this really specific variety that you're just not going to get around here. I think the quality of the hops here is totally world-class right now. The next beer, the 6 is a dark rye. That one really doesn't fit in any categories. That beer is kind of inspired by some of the winter Belgian beers that I've had, and also some of the darker Bière de Gardes from France. That's a very ingredient-driven beer. It has some rye that gives it a nice edge, almost the same kind of edge you would get from having some hop bitterness, really. That's a pretty neat beer, too. A lot of people like that one in our lineup, people who like dark beers. The last one that we do year-round in bottles and draft is the 7. That's probably the most Belgian-esque. I think in the 80s, Belgian-style saisons got basically modernized. They got a lot stronger. They turned more into kind of like special occasion beers than the kind of beer you would drink pitchers of. That was when, water supplies were getting a lot better, so beer wasn't this, bottle replacement anymore. It was really more of a special beverage. And so the 7 is kind of following in the steps of like the popular saisons from the 80s, and it's pretty aromatic. That's where our house yeast comes out the most.
And what about the ones that we're not seeing here?
Yeah, so besides those 4, we do make the Pilsner is called the Engelberg Pilsner. Engelberg is just a German translation of Mount Angel. We source all the hops. That beer's a lot of fun to make. We'll be brewing that Thursday and Friday this week. And then we try to pack in as many seasonals and one-off beers as we can. Like I said, we're all production guys at heart, so we really like having fun and mixing it up, doing things that we haven't done. We try to keep it as interesting as we can. For us, work is a lot more than just work. I mean, I'd like to think that me and the other guys, we show up with a smile on our faces because it's a lot of fun making beer, really.
So can you tell the people who may not know how these beers are made a little bit about the production cycle and the aging?
Yeah, for sure. The numbered beers are all made in our open fermenters. Open fermenters are kind of a throwback to the past. I got used to them working at a brewery in upstate New York called Brewery Omegang. That was one of the few breweries that really practiced open fermentation, especially back then. It's not a very convenient way of making beer. Quite honestly, it can be a really big pain in the ass compared to using closed conical tanks for sure. But it's a nice way to work. I mean, it really keeps it extra hands-on. Those tanks are clean with a brush, and with you hopping in and scraping them out yourself. I do feel like we get extra healthy yeast coming out of those tanks, and the flavor profile of the beers is a little bit different. It's not a matter of it being better per se, but it's we've noticed that our yeast and other yeast strains we've tested also tend to show a little bit more of a floral profile, maybe a little bit fruitier, but definitely a subdued spice character than as if they would be coming out of the taller conical tanks. So that's been really interesting. And it's not like spice characters, like I said, better or worse, but it's definitely different. And with the current strain that we're using on brown beers now, I really enjoy like that fermentation geometry and that character we're getting from that in the open fermenters right now. But if you've ever been to a winery, the fermenters are just like wine fermenters, really. So besides that, the year-round beers, like I said, they all get open fermented with the same house yeast. The German Pilsner we make in 20-barrel batches, pretty much one at a time. That one uses just one variety of hop, Tettnanger. It's a really simple recipe. It's basically just one Pilsner malt, one hop, one really nice Munich lager yeast. I think a lot of the people doing lagers in town right now are using a really neutral strain, because most of those guys are scamming it from one brewery that I won't name. So everyone's kind of using the same yeast for lagers right now, which is fine. It's a nice yeast, but it's really neutral. And the Munich strain that we're using, I think, throws a little bit of sulfur, which is kind of nice. Sulfur, I think, oftentimes is looked down upon as being a bad thing, but in a little pinch of sulfur in a traditional German lager is like a really pleasant nuance, I think. And so that Munich strain that we're using definitely has that pinch of sulfur. And I think the finish is kind of a nicer sort of complexity than some of those neutral strains that kind of leave your palate sort of quick, if that makes any sense.
So how long are they going through the fermentation process until you're move them into barrels, and then how long in the barrel?
Yeah, the fermentation process on our beers is, the lager is super typical. The lager takes about 11 or 12 days to really ferment out, and then we can cool it down and start the lagering process. A lot of people romanticize the lagering process as like the longer the better, but that's not really true. I mean, you're trying to achieve something specific in lagering, and that's clarification more than anything. And if you're lagering longer than you need to, the beer will smooth out relatively quickly if you processed it properly. And if you end up lagering the beer for too long, it's just getting old. If you have something relatively hoppy like our Pilsner, I mean, you don't want to keep that too long. So we never give it more than 3 weeks lagering time, which some brewers would tell you is like the minimum. But I think it works, perfectly for our, when we get it out, the hop character is still really bright and nice. The year-round beers with the Belgian yeast strain have different times in the open fermenters. The 4 ferments really quick because that one goes a little bit warmer also, so that can ferment in about 3 to 4 days in the open fermenters. The stronger beers will take closer to a week, and then we pump those into a conditioning tank. That's a delicate process of pumping fermented beer in a conditioning tank. Normally you would scoop beer around from a pressurized tank to a pressurized tank, so you're doing it all with gas pressure, which is actually really nice and gentle. So we have a really nice variable speed pump that we can do it as gently as possible. Obviously with an open tank you can't pressurize it, so that's why we're using the pump. And then those beers will get a varying amount of conditioning time. It just kind of depends on how much yeast we carried over in the transfer process, and a lot of stuff we do by taste. I mean, really, you have to do almost everything in the brewery by taste. And then I guess the life cycle isn't quite done there. I mean, the bottled beers go through that whole other process of conditioning that we kind of touched upon earlier. So after the beers are conditioned in the conditioning tank for a little while, and they're tasting right and cleared out reasonably well, those will get moved either in the kegs or in the bottles. In the bottles, we prime with fresh yeast and priming sugar. So there's basically like another fermentation happening in the bottle. That's why they go into that warm room, so that fermentation happens quickly and in a healthy manner. And then those beers come out of that warm room, get labeled by hand, and then they're finally ready to go over. So those actually take kind of a long time. And then when we start talking about inventory and forecasting and that sort of thing, that'll play into it, because even, for instance, today I was thinking about what orders we have going out in January, because if we need to brew anything for that, we need to do it right now if it's going to be in bottled form.
What about any of the product that's barrel aged?
What about that barrel aged product?
Yeah, well, you have some that are in the barrel for a while.
Yeah, I'd say probably about 5% of our total production is barrel aged. Not very much. Definitely less than 10% of what we produce is barrel aged. And the barrel aged beers are, gosh, there's so many different ways of looking at those and talking about those. Those are a lot of fun to make, and it's a good thing because they're a tremendous amount of work. There's a lot of losses in barrel aged beers. There's a lot more risk in producing them. And they just take a lot of time. I mean, sourcing the barrels, prepping the barrels, filling them, transferring out, storing them right, trying to time everything. In some ways it can be a logistical nightmare, but that's one of those challenges that when you deal with it and it works out well, it's really satisfying, so that's always good.
Did you see there's a question from John? Have you ever made a beer to guard?
Beer to guard? Yeah, we made a beer to guard. Well, actually, we do a sort of a beer to guard style base once a year for a beer called the Kapstucha. That's our take on a Dutch beer that uses some different spices that you would find in a Geneva spirit. It has juniper, angelica root. Else goes in that. We haven't brewed it in a long time. We're actually kind of due to get going again soon. But the beer to guard style is pretty fun because there's a lot of different ways to make that too. You can use an ale yeast or a lager yeast on that, which really opens the doors. So when we've done it in the past, we've used our lager yeast at an elevated temperature, about 65 degrees, and found a character that we really like there, where it's not too smooth and too clean at that temperature, but it still has a nice round character that you would, I think, expect from a good beer to guard.
Cool. Let's see what else we have here. We're going to look a little at the distribution. Fairly wide West Coast and a few forays into the Midwest.
Yep.
So you want to tell us how you got this distribution pattern and how you built these relationships?
Yeah, a lot of it was just from meeting people. I mean, obviously we started off right here with Point Blank, which covers most of Oregon for us. And then I met a guy who was opening that distributorship in BC, Copper in Theory. At that time, it was called Rain City Brands. He recently changed the name. This guy, Adam, was really nice. He was just a big craft beer fan. He was rolling through town looking for breweries because he was starting his distributorship that was focused mostly on Belgian-style beers and European imports. Adam and I really hit it off. He's a close friend. He stays at my place every time he comes into town. And so we ended up kind of connecting that way. And that's been a neat market too because BC seems to have a pretty big thirst for beer. People are really curious about craft beers there. They don't have a tremendous selection. When we started shipping beer up there over 4 years ago, it was especially trim. It's been really nice to see them grow. I know all the beer fans are really appreciating that. And then the rest of it has been just meeting people. The California distributor, Lime, I met the owner's wife once when she was in town, kind of just by chance. They're in the brewery tasting room, and she really liked our beer. She kind of pitched it to her husband, and then he contacted me, and that was that. And that's worked out really well because it's one of our biggest accounts. Actually, there's a lot of places for the beer to go in California. And then the Washington one is co-owned by one of the owners at Point Blank, so that's how that one came about. The one in Nevada, Sapage, that guy who runs that is a buddy of the guy from California, so he turned me on to that.
It's a social network.
And it's a big social network. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm realizing, this was all kind of through one person to the next. And then the one in Illinois, Cream Wine, happened from an introduction that Tad from Ransom Spirits kind of made for me. So Tad and I were kind of just talking about distributorships one day. I'm a big fan of Tad's stuff at Ransom. If you've never had it, you should. He makes wine and spirits there, and his gins are especially nice. He makes 2 different gins that are spectacular. He's got a dry vermouth now that's really good too.
I think Lee was talking about it, the Old Tom.
Oh yeah.
So Lee, our distiller, who was on a few weeks back, was talking about everybody loves this gin. So.
Lee must have been good. I did a presentation with him once. I thought he had a really good voice and a good way of speaking.
He does. He could do voiceovers.
Yeah, right. But so Tad from Ransom turned me on to the guys there in Illinois, and they were actually a wine and a spirits distributor. So we were their first brewery. They were kind of looking to sort of branch into breweries. Same with the Sapage down there in Nevada. They were definitely more focused on wine. The breweries that they started taking on tended to be more of the Belgian-esque type of breweries, or breweries that were packaging in 750s and that sort of thing.
So how, for the Canadian product, how different is the price? I mean, how much do they add on when you see it on the shelf there?
It's not as bad as you'd think. Adam from Copper in Theory doesn't take as big of a cut as most of the other people, which is nice. So the beers are probably, some of our beers will probably retail here for $10, and those same beers in BC should be about 13 or less.
Tom's starting to get into some of the questions, so I'm going to just switch to that slide, but we'll start off with Tom's question. What percentage of your beers are keg versus bottled, and how big is the staff to handle all of that?
Let's see, we probably bottle about 30 to 35% of what we produce. Not too much. Like I said, we do all of our bottling by hand, so it's kind of tedious. It takes a long time. The production staff is me and one other guy, Garrett Ill, that work full-time. And then we have a third guy, Bobby Burke, who works just about full-time. Um, and then a fourth guy who helps us with those bottling days, and he helps with our labeling too, Brent Small. He also works the tasting room Friday and Saturday, if you've ever been in there then. So about, say, like just over three of us basically do all the production work.
Pretty lean.
Yeah, it doesn't take too much. You can do a lot with, with a handful of hardworking guys in a brewery.
Well, normally if you're bottling off, say you have a 20-barrel tank, are you bottling the whole thing off, or are you splitting it between keg and bottled product?
Yeah, we'll usually split that. So, we would never bottle more than 10 barrels in a day.
Go crazy?
Yeah, it would just take too long. It's a lot of repetitive motion. It's kind of weird on the body.
So let's look at a few of the questions. First, since we're talking about forecasting and inventory in our recent weeks, what are some of the challenges you've seen with forecasting to start with?
It's tough. I mean, obviously, as a production brewery, you're really relying on your distributors to guide you with, what they're going to need. So you always tell your distributors, give me a heads up and let me know when you're going to be low on beer, when you're going to need to order more beer, what you're going to need.
Why is this frozen? Oh, seriously?
Typically do really well from the get-go, and then sometimes it can taper off quite a bit once the first couple of rounds of those get sold. So you just have to make your best guess and use your instinct. But communications is really a big key there for sure.
It'll typically do really well from the get-go, and then sometimes it can taper off quite a bit once the first couple rounds of orders get sold. So you just have to make your best guess and use your instinct, but communication is really, I think, the big key there for sure.
What about inventory? I mean, you have this basement, and what actually can you store there? Do you have a silo over there?
No, we do all of our malt in sacks. We have enough.
Super sacks.
No, it's the 50-pound
Standard
sacks.
bags.
Yeah, we have enough room in the malt room to store about 5 tons, which will tie us over for a while. And then, our walk-in's big enough to accommodate all of our hops and our finished kegs, which is nice. We have a decent amount of square footage in the brewery for how much barrelage we're producing in the year. We're definitely not short on space. I've worked in a couple breweries. I've seen a lot of breweries that are way sort of undersized, and how kind of it can be a really big mess. I mean, you're moving stuff around. You spend more time moving stuff around to make room to work than anything. So it's nice to have some space for sure.
Justin wants to know your square footage, then we'll go back to Christopher.
Oh yeah, the square footage. Gosh, it must be, because we've added a couple oddball sections sort of outside of ours, like in other parts of the basement recently. I'd say the total square footage must be right around 4,000, give or take a couple hundred. Split into like 3 different spaces, a couple of which are basically just extra storage.
And then Christopher wanted to know about at what point you decided to go to the distributor, and if you started with...
Oh, yeah, we started with a distributor from the get-go. I kind of considered self-distributing beer, but it's a lot of work. I think distributors get kind of ragged on quite a bit. A lot of people look at them as, the middleman and this and that, but they have a lot that they have to deal with. They have to warehouse all that product, and ask those guys what their electricity bill is to run those coolers. They have huge coolers. It's not cheap. So for us, if we were self-distributing our beer, then 50 or 60 kegs that I have in Point Blank's warehouse right now wouldn't be in their warehouse. They'd be in our walk-in. And our walk-in cannot accommodate all those kegs. So we would have had to plan for that from the get-go and have a way bigger walk-in and more square footage in the brewery, for instance. That's something that a lot of people don't think about. And then obviously, like, you know, the amount of paperwork is huge. As the, you know, sole owner at my place, I deal with all the paperwork and all those sorts of happenings. And you know, I have one invoice to point blank once a week. It's beautiful. You know, imagine the guys that are self-distributing that have, I mean, gosh, imagine how much paperwork, how many checks they're dealing with, all the invoicing. Like, that stuff takes up time, and you got to, you know, put some value on that for sure. So it's nice having somebody to take care of that for you.
How about to Grain and Gristle? Point Blank is distributing to Grain and Gristle for you?
I have an arrangement where I am distributing the beers myself to the Grain and Gristle, which,
And also.
yeah, that should be kind of hush-hush though.
Oh. Pretend you didn't hear
Yeah,
that.
pretend you didn't hear that, but I think that's like a totally reasonable thing. I mean, you know, I could set it up more legitimately also, but it's, yeah, there's a lot of weird little laws and loopholes around all the distribution stuff. It's so heavily regulated, it's kind of obnoxious. So I try to stay out of it unless somebody starts busting my balls about something. I'm gonna kind of do things my way.
Okay. Does any of you guys have questions about forecasting or inventory before we look at some other issues? Okay, so how do you account for aging the beer in barrels? In terms of costing, the impact on cost? I mean, you have a certain percentage in barrels.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the square footage was about 4,000.
Oh, here's another forecasting question.
So, have you ever been off badly in forecasting that I knew buying without needed supplies? Probably. I'm pretty good at forgetting mistakes. I'm sure we've been off, but usually not badly. Usually it's something that, you know, maybe if we're out for a couple of days or we're in a pinch. One nice benefit of being in Portland is that we have lots of other brewers here, and suppliers are very nearby. A lot of our malt comes from Country Malt up in Vancouver, so if I forgot to order something on our delivery, I can always just will call something in a day, which is really convenient. Obviously, brewers in a lot of the places can't do that or don't have that convenience. But there's been little things like, you know, there was one time when I ran out of caps, just out of the blue. I didn't realize it. I forgot to order caps, and I have a supplier for those out in, I forget where their warehouse is, Utah or something like that. So I wasn't going to get them right away, and I called up Mike from the Commons and said, hey, Mike, can I come by, send some caps? And of course, he says, sure thing, you know, blah, blah, blah. So that's really nice. But nothing that's like crippled production, though. Thankfully.
I don't think we ever finished the cost of aging beers. So,
yeah, as far as cost of them, I mean, they take up space for sure. You know, if you have something in barrel for over a year, I mean, that's taking up a little chunk of square footage. It might not seem like a lot, but over 12 months, it'll add up. And then, but most of it is really the labor. If we're doing fruit beers, the fruit can be a pretty significant cost also. It takes a lot of fruit to make a good fruit beer. And I think a lot of people would be kind of surprised to find out how much fruit goes into a fruit beer. And, you know, getting good quality fruit is, that's one where like the logistics can be a nightmare. When you're trying to deal with fruit growers, like fruit growers have no idea like when their fruit's going to be ready. Especially as brewers, like usually you're not getting the really pretty fruit that's good for the shelves, but you're getting fruit that might be, you know, too small or too big, or maybe it's a little bruised up here and there, but that's the fruit that you're going to get, you know, a little bit better of a deal on that the grower has no other use for, really. So brewers are a good outlet for that kind of fruit. But when you're talking about using, you know, 100 pounds in a 59-gallon oak barrel, even if you're getting a sweet deal on the fruit, it's still 100 pounds that you're going to get 40 odd gallons of beer out of. You can do that math. It gets pretty steep. But that's why you just charge more for those beers. You make it appropriate. We're not making, more money on our barrel-aged beers than we are on our year-round beers, even though they cost a lot more. It's just, like I said, factoring in all the labor and the other costs. You just make it pencil out the same.
Okay, great. So the other question kind of gets into the issue of like percentage keg versus bottle, but how are you breaking down what goes to the tasting room in terms of the percentage of your sales versus what's going to your group of distributors and what's going to your own places?
Well, the tasting room definitely comes first. I mean, we never want to be out of beer at our own place. So that kind of takes precedent over everything. And then with the distributors, I usually just tell them, whoever kind of gives me their orders first, I'll start setting those beers aside and putting them together. If it's for out-of-state stuff, doesn't get picked up weekly like the local stuff, which makes a big difference. So for an out-of-state order, we might start putting it together over the course of several weeks. We might be shipping, 4 or 5 pallets of beer somewhere. For us, it's several batches, and the distributor wants something specific. It might take us a while to put all that together, especially if it's a mix of kegs and cases and that sort of thing. So usually I just have a little Post-it note on my desk that is in line of, who got the orders in first, and we start working on them as, fast as we can, and that's how we model the production around that too, obviously, to make it as convenient as we can also.
What's the percentage that would go to distribution versus the tasting room or to the restaurants?
In like volume kind of?
Like 70% goes to distribution, 10% is sold in the tasting room?
The tasting room is pretty small. I'd say less than 10% gets sold in the tasting room, especially looking at it like by volume of the beer, and not by revenue per se.
By volume, I guess, would be the best way to put it.
Yeah. So almost everything we make really goes to distributors. I mean, very little of it goes to the tasting room, and
Or the restaurant.
and the restaurants take a blip. I mean, you can imagine the restaurants as basically just being, 1 or 2 accounts out of the several that the, Point Blank already has locally for us on top of that. So.
Now Justin's asking what percent of the revenue comes from the tasting room. If it's less than 10%,
It's the percent of the revenue is pretty high compared to the percent of the volume, because the tasting room will have pretty big days when we're selling like a lot of our special barrel aged releases. We can sell quite a bit of through the tasting room. So for like those sort of special releases, there's been a couple that we've sold the entire release out of the tasting room. The beers that have kind of got more of a cult following for us, like the fresh peach beer, that was one that we can sell out really fast. That kind of caught us off guard this year. We sold 80 cases of that beer, 75 cases of that beer this year in half an hour, which was kind of a feat. Just selling that much beer in that small amount of time, it was kind of wild. That really blew our minds. So, then we started talking about doing bottle limits and that sort of thing to kind of spread it around, and so that it doesn't go in half an hour, which is kind of insane. But I'm trying to think of what that number would be. Percentage revenue, it'd probably be over 15%, I think, is a pretty fair guess.
does that answer your question, Justin?
Yeah, between 15 and 20.
Yeah, I think what we saw with Mike from the Commons, he said that 10% is in the tasting room, but that's 30% of his revenue.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so this depends. Your beers, they're similar price points, I think.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Have you considered going to a subscription model for these special beers so that they're all pre-sold in advance to people?
Nah, that sounds like a lot of work. I'm still a little old-fashioned for that. I still want to just put the beer out. But, I mean, it kills me that we even have to have bottle limits now on some of the stuff. But Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of wild. It's like, it's still just beer for us. There's so many good beers coming out left and right in Portland. I don't know. I can't imagine getting in line for any of them. Every week there's a new beer.
So what are your plans for the future?
We're really happy with the way the brewery's going right now. We kind of hit, I think, a real sweet spot where all of us working there are really happy with our jobs. We're not pushing it too hard. Because we could definitely squeeze a little bit more production out of there if we wanted to, but it'd be pretty minimal. And then at that point, it's just getting kind of more complicated than it's worth. We all like working pretty normal hours. You know, in the earlier days of the brewery, I was working pretty nonstop, and that gets old after a while. It's nice to work, you know, less than 10 hours a day, and especially doing production work, it can kind of wear you out a little bit. And so we really like what we're doing right now. I don't think we're going to change much. Like as far as the structure of the business is concerned, or like what we're doing output-wise, but we're definitely talking about just more creative things. We want to do a bigger focus, I think, on fresh fruit beers. We've been learning a lot about processing fresh fruit and how it works in fermentations and in beers, and we've been really excited about all the different nuances we're getting with the different varieties of fruit. I'm learning quite a bit about fruit from the different growers that we're working with right now, and it's been really interesting. So I'd like to maybe do some more different cherry beers. I'd like to work in a nectarine beer, some different grape-based beers, and really kind of take a focus on some barrel-aged fruit beers. I think would be, for us, like personally, really satisfying, I think, as brewers.
Creek. I love Creek. That's one of my favorites. Great. Let's see. Now we're opening it up for more questions. We're going to stick with production, or we could do a brew pub. Everybody read the question. Would you do it over again to stick with production, or do a brew pub?
That's a tough call. I like doing the production work. Like I said, it's kind of nice having a job where you get to just work with a couple people and really focus that way. There can definitely be, like, I think, a lot more drama in a restaurant type setting. You're dealing with a lot more people.
All those pesky customers.
A lot of customers, a lot of employees. I mean, you know, between the Grain and Gristle and Old Salt, we have over 50 employees. You know, like I said, at the brewery, I've got a few. And it's nice managing a few instead of 50, I'll tell you that. But then there's times too when you roll into Amnesia up there on Mississippi in July, and it's packed to the gills, and he's probably raking in 10 grand on that one day, selling pints under his own roof. You think to yourself, man, maybe a brew pub wouldn't be such a bad idea either.
You just... Sorry. Other questions?
It didn't, actually. We just started making a Pilsner because we wanted to make a
Okay. Bar manager where Rich works said until fairly recently it was hard to get local Pilsner beers. Did that kind of demand factor into your decision to start brewing a Pils?
It didn't, actually. We just started making a Pilsner because we wanted to make a Pilsner.
It's so important.
But, yeah. But we were actually kind of surprised at the demand for that beer, though. So we were really happy to find out that beer is really easy for us to sell, and we brew it pretty consistently. And that's been kind of a pleasant surprise to walk into with that beer. Since we've started making that one, a lot of other ones have become available, though, now. I think at the time when we started, Caldera was the only brewery that had one available. And now Breakside's got one. I think the Commons is going to start doing one year-round.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? Southern Oregon Brewing is a Czech-style one. Hop Valley, I think, might have one. I don't know if it's year-round or not, though. But they're popping up a lot more. It's definitely becoming more common. It's an awesome style of beer.
Yeah. More questions? Start pondering and typing. Oh, they have
Oh,
the
cool.
comment on tap.
Yeah, they have
You said Ken's
a
artisanal pizza.
big German focus, too, I think because Sean, one of the brewers over there, I think he studied in Germany, if I remember right. So I think they have a kind of a nice German focus, sort of the same way that we do.
very specifically trying to get the most volume we could, but keeping the process what I would consider hands-on.
Oh, okay.
Oh, the size of the brew house was
We still use
um,
and that sort of thing, but
very specifically
to make the beer
trying to get the most volume
brew that way.
we could, but keeping the process what I would consider hands-on. I mean, obviously hands-on might mean different things to different people. We still use pumps and that sort of thing, but I wanted to make the beer, very hands-on. I wanted to keep the brewery that way and not deal with expanding the brew house size. You know, we added a couple fermenters and that sort of thing, but I wanted the brew house to stay the same. And so 10 barrels was basically I think the biggest volume we could reasonably do and still bottle the beers by hand and process them mostly by hand.
But you're doing double batches some days.
We'll do back-to-back brews on like back-to-back days. So the brew house isn't set up to do two in the same day.
Oh, okay.
So if we have a 20-barrel fermenter, we'll brew, like for instance, like Thursday and Friday, we'll brew 10 barrels each of the Pilsner. They go into the 20-barrel tank.
And what is preventing you from doing back-to-back brews? Because that's, we've talked about buying equipment, the people have been putting together their equipment plans, so that's a constraint for you. What is the constraint?
The equipment-wise, we would just need a bigger hot liquor tank or some sort of like inline water heater. Which is those inline water heaters you might hear a lot about. They're pretty finicky. Every guy I've talked to who's gotten one of those it's never really worked out the way they want them to work out, and they end up dumping a lot more money into it than they expected to. The best way to do it, if that's your plan, is to just get a really good size hot liquor tank, which we could have done in our spot too. But then again, that turned into also like a lifestyle choice. Like, do you want to be running shifts where brewers are coming in at 5 a.m. and leaving at 8 p.m.? I'd rather work together with my guys, and we all kind of come in at the same time and leave at the same time. And, we kind of prefer it that way. It's not as efficient, but I think it's efficient enough.
I try to keep some beer on hand all the time that I expect will need to go out.
Lead time for out-of-state distributors? How do you plan forecast their needs for the next?
Like I said, you really have to kind of just talk to them and sometimes make some guesses. I try to keep some beer on hand all the time that I expect will need to go out. But sometimes you get surprised and orders come in that you weren't expecting and that sort of thing. The question about lead time, is that referring to like time between them placing an order and the order being ready and going out? Is that what you think it means?
Yeah, that's what Andrea means.
That just really depends on the inventory and what they're asking for. There's some times when they'll say, hey, I need this, I need this, I need that, and we look in our storage and our inventory, and it's all there, and we can send it out as soon as they can send the truck to pick it up. But sometimes it could be as long as 2 months if they're asking for large amounts of really specific things.
But the one in Illinois, for example, how often do they come here to get beer, or you have to pay to ship it to them?
The distributor always picks up the tab for shipping.
Okay, so you're shipping it, you're finding somebody, or they find someone to ship it to Illinois?
Yeah, usually they find somebody because they're working with shippers all the time, and they tend to find good rates because it's kind of what they do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does that answer your question, Andrea?
For the volume of the single batch, and by the time it gets rolling the next day,
Oh, great.
it's really good time.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
let's
And
see.
Tom wants to know,
More to get to the first day. So we would pitch like we would normally pitch.
Oh, no, we just pitch for the volume of the single batch, and by the time it gets rolling the next day, I mean, it's really good timing, so we don't need to add extra yeast or pitch more yeast on the first day. So we would pitch like we would normally pitch otherwise.
so you pitch for for 10 barrels and then add the second day's.
Yeah, because,
10 barrels to that.
you know, the 24 hours later, that yeast that we pitched initially is already going. I mean, you know, in a commercial brewery, like, if you know how to manage the yeast, then the yeast should be extra healthy. In 24 hours, it should be moving along.
pitch yeast in different ways.
In what sense?
Some guys pitch based on weight, some pitch based on
Yes, we'd rather have everybody saying similar things.
Yeah, I mean,
They're
pitch
confusing
rates,
us.
pitch rates are interesting. I mean, a lot of brewers pitch yeast in different ways. Some guys pitch based off weight, some pitch based on volume. Some do cell counts, some don't do cell counts. To do cell counts, all you really need is a decent microscope. I think it's a really worthwhile thing to have. But a lot of guys get by without doing any cell counts at all, which is pretty interesting. You typically bottle to order.
Okay, so now we're addressing, I think it's for Christopher, do you bottle to order, hold in conditioning tanks, or you bottle condition?
We basically bottle to order, I guess. I mean, we, like I said, I try to anticipate, you know, what kind of beers we're going to need on hand, you know, over the next couple months, and then just try to make sure that we have that beer ready to go.
But the bottle conditioning takes,
The bottle conditioning process takes at least 2 weeks.
yeah, so you have to forecast and not, you have that lead time built into it.
Yeah, so you've got a week of fermentation, at least a week of conditioning time, another couple weeks of bottle conditioning time. So you're looking at least a month. And if you get into a pinch, you might not be able to work into the schedule right away. I mean, I usually do my production schedule about 2 weeks out. I feel like if I go beyond 2 weeks, so many things change in that time period that I end up reworking that third week or beyond anyways. So I usually just do 2 weeks ahead, and that seems to work, at least for what I'm doing. I know some of the bigger breweries will schedule out a lot further than that, but a lot of those guys tend to have more regular sales, I think, too, and like predictable sales and that sort of thing.
And you'll all see this, we'll get into this production planning lecture. You'll see different approaches for doing that, depending on if you have a shelf-stable product or you have an unstable forecasting.
Mm-hmm. So
Rich
there's
has a quick
a
one.
question about yeast strains. For the numbered beers, we use one Belgian strain. For the German Pilsner, we use the one Munich Lager strain. And for our one-offs and seasonal beers, we use all sorts. I mean, I think the Y Yeast or Yeast Lab told us once that we were like second right behind Nick at Block 15 for using different yeast strains throughout the year. I think they gave Nick an award that he actually has on the wall, which is pretty fun.
Do you use Excel for your
Oh.
production scheduling?
Uh,
Please say yes.
Yes, I do. I think Excel's great. I like to keep things simple, and I have the production schedule I do weekly, and yeah, it's just a really simple Excel spreadsheet. And then where I have all the days, and then at the bottom I have a line for every tank, because the tanks really add up, and you have all those fermenters and conditioning tanks. So it's nice to be able to see on every day what beer's in what tank, and then you can kind of sort of see the tanks like right under the schedule essentially. And I think that's been really convenient for me in kind of dealing with the schedule in a fast, efficient way, I guess.
So you're integrating what I've talked about, it's called the Gantt chart, the lines for every tank.
Yeah.
And with when things are ready, what packaging they're going to go in.
Yeah, exactly. I just basically have the name of whatever beer is in that tank at any given time, and that's good enough for us. If you have like a really complicated setup, you might want to start throwing like the batch numbers in there and everything else, but usually we don't have too many of the same beers going on from different batches at the same time. We're usually going from one to the next to the next. So.
Andrea, I think that's very similar to what you're doing, from what I've seen from the work you've handed in. Similar kind of, that's what I thought. Okay, so we have 1 more minute left, so in case anybody has a desperate last question. Do you use brewing software like ProMash or such for recipes?
Nope. I'm actually, I don't do too many calculations for the recipes, believe it or not. I'll do calculations for hop bitterness for sure. That's pretty important. But even then, I feel like after you've made beer for a long time, you get so used to the ingredients and the processing, especially on the same system, that you can just do a lot of stuff in your head. Believe it or not, it gets pretty easy to formulate the recipes and tinker with them.
Even with fruit, your forays into the fruit beers?
Yeah, I think so. You gotta still leave a lot of it to instinct. You don't want to get too deep in that sort of thing, and I think that can suck a lot of the fun out of it too.
As Rich says, like cooking.
Yeah, exactly like cooking, actually. Exactly like cooking. Do it to taste.
Oh, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and we really want to thank Alex for coming.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. It's been a great session. I hope everybody's enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, you guys.